Bismillah il-Amna il-Aqdas. In the name of God, the most impregnable, the most holy. The following is going to operate as an addendum to the 2 episodes of the Baha'i Mafia that Kayvan Yahyai and I recorded last month. I put this addendum here as a result of actions undertaken by some of these Baha'i hacks themselves. It was brought to my attention by Kayvan Yahyai that recently, on one of these many Baha'i lists on Facebook, that Baha'i shill and hack extraordinaire Susan Stiles Mennick basically put her foot into it and has started regurgitating old accusations, unsubstantiated accusations that these people were pushing under false aliases back on Talk Religion Baha'i, as well as the old Iranian.com. Old accusations and old unsubstantiated nonsense that was first promoted by this false name going on Talk Religion Baha'i by the alias of Lib, L-I-B, who was actually none other than Badi Villar Cardenas of Peru, of Lima, Peru. And also then on the Iranian.com site by this false alias by the name of Nozar Mahallati, who was none other than the ID of Shaheen Tawakkoli, an MD in Austin, Texas, and a very glaze-eyed fundamentalist cultist Baha'i. Now, these accusations, these unsubstantiated slurs, have come back because of these podcasts that have been made and put online, especially those 2 episodes of the Baha'i Mafia, and the fact that I have called out these neoconservative hacks that the Baha'is congregate around. And so instead of answering the actual points that were put in these podcasts, these cultists are basically dredging out old accusations and whatnot, but apparently they have been the contradictions and the nonsense in these accusations have been actually called out by one of their own. Nevertheless, I consider this a trap that the Baha'is, these hyphen Baha'i cultists, have fallen into online. So these accusations have now given me the opportunity to bring forth and resurrect the following, and that is that there are actual Baha'i drug dealers. This accusation that they have leveled at me about being a drug dealer basically is based on the fact that I am an advocate, an open advocate for the sacramental use of entheogenic plants, such as psilocybin mushrooms, the ayahuasca, the hayoma, and as many already know. I was part of a process back between 2012 to 2014 of communicating with the office of the Grand Ayatollah Muhammad Sadiq Rouhani in Qom, Iran, in obtaining a fatwa that we obtained about the licitness or the halalness of using psychoactive plants among Shia Muslims, and especially the ayahuasca. Now, because I have been open for many years, going back to the early part of the last decade, about this issue, I have not tried to hit it or otherwise. The Baha'is have basically crafted a narrative claiming that I am a drug dealer. Now, number one, I am not a drug dealer. I have never dealt or sold any kind of illegal substance. I've never used any of this stuff either. And so, this is basically their way of trying to sling mud and slur people who are merciless critics and avowed enemies of their organization and their cult, such as myself. But let's now bring up the following. There was actually a case in Australia, in Western Australia, in Perth, during the last decade, in the early part of the last decade, where 3 Baha'is, and 3 very eminent Baha'is, 2 of whom were part of the National Teaching Committee of the Baha'i, and National Teaching Committee and Youth Year of Service Committee of the Baha'i National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia. And I put a letter up, or actually a post up, initially on Talk Religion Baha'i back in 2006 when this false ID Lib, who was actually Betty Villar Cardenas, was just relentlessly smearing me and mudslinging about this issue. Now, their mudslinging and their smearing is basically as a way of smoke screening their own, basically community or communal lapses. Now, in 2004, 3 individuals were arrested, tried, and convicted in a Western Australian court in Perth. These individuals were Erfan Isfahani, a member of the National Teaching Committee and Youth Year of Service Committee, Arash Kalani of the National Teaching Committee and member and Youth Year of Service Committee, and Sahba Yazdani. These individuals were apparently trafficking MDMA pills, as well as the illegal substance known as ice, and apparently other assorted narcotic pills. The court documents of this, you can actually obtain these court documents from the registry of the Perth, or of the Western Australian Supreme Court, I believe. So anybody can basically go and get these court documents and the proceedings and the hearing, etc. So they're available to the public. So this is not something I am, basically making up. You can actually find this. These individuals, like I said, were trafficking MDMA pills and the ice. Erfan Isfahani and Arash Kalani were apparently regular representatives of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia on its travel teaching campaigns to the Solomon Islands. On their teaching campaigns, they were representing the Australian National Youth Committee and other assorted Micronesian islands where they were going, where Baha'is proselytized their cult. Both were convicted by the courts in the state of Western Australia. I believe it was the Supreme Court of Western Australia, for narcotics trafficking and supply, including the sentence apparently of supply to minors. Sahba Yazdani was convicted twice with his appeal overturned. He was the lead supplier. An Australian Federal Police sting operation in joint cooperation with the state of Western Australia Police revealed at the time that Mr. Yazdani was the region's, or Western Australia's, drug kingpin, representing a shadowy figure whose identity he refused to disclose. Firearms as well as illegal drugs were found in his house and vehicle. Sahba Yazdani is also noted to have made hefty contributions to the Baha'i National Fund and to the Baha'i International Fund. All of these hefty contributions to the Baha'i funds were from his occupation as a drug dealer. Contributions being drug monies which neither the National Spiritual Assembly of Australia nor the Baha'i international community have to date returned or abandoned to Australian law enforcement officials or Australian institutions. Unexplainably, Michael Kurtati, who at the time was a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia, was the solicitor representing these individuals. He was also the attorney, the official attorney, one of the official attorneys for the National Spiritual Assemblies of the Baha'is of Australia at the time. I don't know whether that is still the case, but at the time, around 2004, 5, and 6, that was the case. He represented Sahba Yazdani during his trial, so questions abound as to the identity of the shadowy lead kingpin figure of this Baha'i drug ring, which Mr. Yazdani refused to give. And so rumors abound that he or she is a Baha'i living in Sydney, or I've even heard from one individual that it is possibly even someone living on the Gold Coast in Queensland. Apparently, the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia knows or knew at the time who this individual is or was, but played dumb to Australian law enforcement authorities, misleading them in their investigation, refusing to give this individual up, which technically would make them accomplices and accessories to a crime of drug trafficking. I make this suggestion publicly in this post to the Australian Federal Police at the time that to learn the identity of this individual, they must question the Baha'i body itself, including its attorney and member, Mr. Michael Kurtati. Whether that actually happened or not, I don't know. However, I was subsequently, after the post I made on Talk Religion Baha'i, I was actually contacted by two separate journalists, one of whom I suspected at the time may have been a agent of the Australian Federal Police, who wanted to know what more I knew about this case, and I basically referred them to this post and advised them that if that that Michael Cortati, if he could be indicted somehow because of the conflict of interest, that he would potentially be their lead to whoever this individual was. Withal, it is rather disturbing that the Australian Baha'i National Spiritual Assembly, nor the Baha'i World Center in Haifa, Israel, ever returned the drug money contributions made to it by Mr. Sahba Yazdani. Now, I should add that Mr. Sahba Yazdani had actually 2 stints in prison. He was convicted for this particular crime in 2006, and I believe later on, sometime during the close of the last decade, he was again booked for basically the same thing and spent another 2 or 3 or 4 years in prison. Even more disturbing is that they led local and national Australian law enforcement authorities down the garden path in regard to the identity of this shadowy figure. So they prevented, by lying collectively, these Baha'i institutions, they averted the arrest and apprehension of a lead drug kingpin in Australia. So while Baha'i cultists on the internet, and especially USENET at the time, and now on Facebook, can maliciously smear and accuse sincere individuals such as myself, who are bona fide users or advocates for the spiritual and sacramental use of entheogenic plants as a sacrament, a substance technically, at least at that time, was not illegal in Australia, and at least in the United States, is now protected by a United States Supreme Court ruling in regards to the Santo Daime, or excuse me, not the Santo Daime, the UDV, the Union Vegetable. I believe the Santo Daime subsequently have now found themselves in the same situation. When they accuse, these Baha'is accuse advocates and people who use entheogenic plants in a sacramental setting as being drug addicts and drug traffickers without any evidence, all unsubstantiated, all lies, all smears. They're hypocritically silent about the cases of bona fide drug abuse and illegal drug and narcotics trafficking amongst their own by members and authorities, not just any lay members, but authorities within their own community. Okay? It would be one thing, for example, if you had a couple of Baha'is being drug traffickers and drug dealers arrested, booked, and put in prison. But when you have a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of Australia, okay, who is also the solicitor, the attorney for the National Spiritual Assembly of Australia, representing these individuals. I mean, it's not as if in Perth, Western Australia, there's a dearth of lawyers and attorneys and solicitors. There's tons of these guys. But, this individual, Cortati, specifically represented these 3 individuals as their attorney in court. Who knows who the barrister was, because the Australian legal system is separate. The solicitor, there's a solicitor and the barrister. The barrister is who actually advocates within a court setting. But nevertheless, the lead attorney representing these 3 individuals was Michael Cortati, member at the time of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia. Furthermore, the Baha'i authorities should enrich their coffers from the monies of court-convicted drug pushers. It says volumes about the corruption and the abuse and corruption of power within this cult, this Scientology Stalinist type cult. So, if Susan Mennick, who, is the epitome of an aggressive Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-American corporate mentality, a perpetrator that is the consummate production of the Anglo-American neoliberal zeitgeist. I call her a virtual female Baha'i version of Donald Trump. If she wants to walk down that path and trudge up old accusations that have proven time and again to be smears and lies, if she wants to walk down that road, then I'm quite happy to bring up these cases and nail these people to the wall. Because to this day, we have not had an answer from the Baha'i officials themselves as to what this case was, where the monies went, what contributions by these individuals were made to the Baha'i Fund, whether these monies were returned, and then furthermore, why was a member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia in the form of Mr. Michael Kurtati representing these people? You know, they couldn't afford any attorneys. So the fact in itself that Mr. Michael Kurtati of National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia was representing these three individuals, two of whom were members of his National Youth Committee and Youth Year of Service Committee, etc., their official bodies, says that there was a serious conflict of interest and that these people were attempting to cover up something and misled the Australian court system in Western Australia, as well as possibly the Australian Federal Police. Now, this all happened in the period before the Kevin Rudd government came in. So these people were already booked when the Labour government of Kevin Rudd came in 2007. But all of this happened during the time that John Howard, the Tory Liberal coalition prime minister from 1996 to 2007, was Prime Minister of Australia. And it appears to me that since 2013, when the Abbott, Turnbull, and now Morrison governments have been in place, that these Baha'is in Australia itself have been engaged in very similar kind of activities. And this says to anybody who actually scrutinizes these issues that the Baha'is in Australia have an intimate relationship with the Liberal National Tory coalition. And it is hoped that when this current government in Australia is finally booted out of office, which will probably and most definitely happen within the next few months, if not at the latest by the end of this year, in the next Australian federal election, that a lot of these perquisites that the Baha'is, the Australian hyphen Baha'i community seems to enjoy with these right-wingers will also stop for a significant period of time. So this is what I want to say, is that, you know, these people are trudging up old accusations and old smears that have been discredited time and again, that are based on the fact that I'm open about and advocate on behalf of the sacramental use of entheogenic plants. They wanted to call me a drug dealer. Well, you know, what's the court that convicted me? You know, do I have any kind of a criminal record? Well, all of the answer to all of these questions is resoundingly no. But the Baha'is themselves, those who are making the accusations, such as Susan Mennick, are very well aware of the fact that in Australia, at the very time when they initially were making these accusations against me in public on Talk Religion Baha'i, Iranian.com, and now on Facebook, that 3 individuals amongst their own were in fact convicted by an Australian court in Western Australia, in the city of Perth, of precisely the very thing that they are accusing me of. Which leads me to this, you know, Baha'i enrichment from drug trafficking. You know, this is something that needs to be investigated, and I'm quite surprised by the fact that the Iranian authorities and the Iranian media, who's usually, smearing the Baha'is themselves, didn't really pick up on this issue. This was a big story. And it was such a big story, at least locally in Western Australia, that, you know, like I said, I was twice contacted by 2 journalists about it after this post, even though one of them I suspected at the time may have been an agent of the Australian Federal Police itself, trying to find out more information, trying to find out whether I knew anything more than they had. Anyway, Susan Mennick, you know, aka female version of Donald Trump among the Baha'is, this is your answer for the smearing that you have been engaged in recently behind my back. And this seems to be your modus operandi in every conceivable context with enemies of your cult. But, you know, you don't have anywhere to run to. I have your number. You know it, and I know it. And, you know, here's the egg on your face. So watch yourself, okay? You also know that I know how you lost your position as editor of H. Baha'i. You also know that I know how you lost your job, your first academic job, that you were at and what the reason for that is. I won't say anything more about those right now because those are kind of not immediately relevant to this particular issue. But if you're going to smear me because you have no answers to any of the points that Kayvan Yahyai and I raised in those specific podcasts about the Baha'i Mafia, then you got another thing coming. So I'll leave it there. Do with it what you want. I'll put links to these posts in the link description of this video once it's uploaded to YouTube. And we'll call it a day on this particular issue. I'll inform everybody that there are new podcasts in the works between myself and Kayvan Yahyai, and hopefully with Siam Akzand in the near future. And maybe even other podcasts with some of the regulars that I've been doing podcasts with. And I also owe a podcast to, I believe I owe a podcast to, who is it do I owe a podcast? Oh, there's so many people who have contacted me about doing podcasts with them about these issues. Yes, I owe a podcast to Dale Husband. I will definitely do one or more podcasts with him in the near future as well. And I think that in order to make these manageable, I will only limit myself to one podcast a week. And we will talk about these very similar issues all the way until, whenever we get tired of talking about them. So I'll leave it there. La hujja ila aliyan qabla nabi.